At my brother's wedding, his bride told me I wasn't welcome, so I took back the honeymoon tickets and left. The look on everyone's face when I walked out with that envelope was priceless, but what they didn't know was that those tickets were just the beginning of what I was about to take back. Sarah, my brother David's new wife, stood there in her $5,000 dress with this smug smile as she delivered the news. "We've decided this is a family-only celebration now," she announced loud enough for half the reception to hear, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "And since you're not really family," the crystal champagne flute slipped from my hand, shattering against the marble floor of the Beverly Hills Country Club, the sound cutting through the classical music like a knife. The entire reception fell silent. 200 guests turned to stare as Sarah's parents nodded approvingly behind her, and my own parents, just stood there looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. David, my brother who I'd helped through college, who I'd bailed out of trouble more times than I could count, wouldn't even meet my eyes. Sarah savored every second of my humiliation, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting her pearl necklace as she waited for me to break down and beg. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and smiled. "I'm Megan Martinez, 28, and I've been planning weddings for LA's elite for the past 6 years. David is my younger brother by 3 years, and until that moment, I thought we were close. I'd spent the last 8 months planning his dream wedding to Sarah, a woman I never particularly liked but tolerated for his sake. What David didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I hadn't just planned this wedding. I'd paid for most of it, and I was about to remind everyone exactly who held the real power in this beautifully decorated room. The thing about being a wedding planner in Beverly Hills is that you learn to plan for everything, including betrayal. As I stood there holding that envelope, watching Sarah's confident smirk start to falter, I realized this was going to be even more satisfying than I'd imagined, because Sarah had just made the biggest mistake of her perfectly planned life, and she didn't even know it yet. Sarah had started her campaign against me 6 months ago, right after David proposed. It began with little comments about how I was too involved in their relationship, how I needed to find my own life instead of living through David. She convinced him that I was jealous of their happiness, that my suggestions for the wedding were attempts to control them. Slowly but surely, she began cutting me out of decisions I'd been making, claiming she wanted the wedding to reflect their vision, not anyone else's. The irony was almost too perfect. Sarah came from old money. Her father owned a chain of high-end jewelry stores across California, but their finances were tied up in investments and real estate. They looked wealthy, lived wealthy, but had surprisingly little liquid cash. That's why they'd been so grateful when I offered to help with wedding expenses. "It's my gift to you both," I'd said, wanting David to have the wedding of his dreams. I'd covered the venue deposit, the catering, the flowers, the band, even those honeymoon tickets to Bora Bora that were burning a hole in my purse. David had been uncomfortable taking money from me at first, but Sarah quickly convinced him it was family helping family. She became positively giddy about spending what she thought was my generous contribution to their happiness. She upgraded everything: the caviar service, the imported champagne, the string quartet to a full orchestra. By the time the bills were tallied, I'd spent nearly $150 on their perfect day. But here's the thing about spending that kind of money on someone's wedding: you keep receipts, lots of receipts. And when you're a professional event planner, you know exactly how to structure those receipts to protect yourself. Every single vendor contract had my name on it. Not David's, not Sarah's. Legally speaking, I wasn't giving them a wedding gift. I was paying for services that I could cancel at any moment. The envelope in my hand contained copies of every single contract, every receipt, every confirmation number. More importantly, it contained cancellation notices for every single vendor, service, and reservation associated with their wedding and honeymoon. The beauty of the wedding industry is that almost everything can be canceled with proper notice. And as the person who'd made all the arrangements, I had that authority. Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts. "Are you going to leave quietly, or do we need to call security?" The malicious glee in her voice was unmistakable. She was enjoying this moment, probably had been planning it for weeks. A few guests began to murmur, some looking embarrassed, others clearly entertained by the drama unfolding. "Oh, I'll leave," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly across the silent reception hall. "But first, I need to make a few phone calls." I pulled out my phone with one hand while still holding the envelope with the other. "You see, there seems to be some confusion about who's really family here." The first call I made was to the country club's manager, a woman I'd worked with dozens of times over the years. "Hi, Jennifer, it's Megan Martinez. I need to speak with you about the reservation for the Martinez-Williams wedding reception." "Yes, that's right. The one happening right now." Sarah's face began to change as she heard me speaking. "I'm afraid I need to cancel the remainder of the evening services. The contract is in my name, and I'm exercising my right to terminate. Yes, I understand there will be fees, but I'm prepared to pay them." The color drained from Sarah's face as the reality of what I was doing began to sink in. David finally looked at me, confusion replacing his previous embarrassment. "Megan, what are you doing?" "I'm leaving, just like she asked," I replied, dialing the next number. This time it was a catering company. The conversation was brief but effective. Within minutes, the waitstaff began quietly removing champagne glasses and hors d'oeuvres from the reception area. The guests looked around in bewilderment as their drinks disappeared and the music abruptly stopped. "You can't do this," Sarah hissed, her composure finally cracking. "This is our wedding day." "Actually, I can," I said, pulling the contracts out of the envelope and holding them up for everyone to see. "Every single service here was contracted and paid for by me. The venue, the catering, the music, the flowers, even your precious imported orchids. My name is on every single contract, which means I have every legal right to cancel them." My parents finally found their voices. "Megan, surely we can discuss this." my mother said nervously, glancing around at the increasingly agitated guests. This is getting out of hand. Is it? I asked, my voice still eerily calm, because it seems to me like I'm just respecting Sarah's wishes. She said I'm not family, that I'm not welcome at this family celebration, so I'm removing myself and everything I contributed from the equation. The third call was to the florist. Within 20 minutes, staff members would arrive to remove every single flower arrangement from the venue. The fourth call was to the photographer, canceling the remainder of the shoot and the entire reception coverage. By the time I made the fifth call to the honeymoon resort in Bora Bora, Sarah was openly crying, her perfect makeup streaming down her cheeks in black rivulets. Stop, David finally said, reaching out to grab my arm. Megan, please, we can work this out. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, for the first time in months. This man I'd helped support through college, who I'd celebrated with through every achievement, who I'd loved unconditionally since the day he was born. He'd stood there and watched his bride humiliate me in front of 200 people. And only now, when his perfect day was crumbling around him, did he want to work it out. No, David, I said quietly, shaking my head. We can't. You made your choice when you stood there and said nothing while she told me I wasn't family. You want to know what family does? Family doesn't let anyone, not even the person they love most, treat their sister like garbage. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Sarah had spent months trying to convince David that I was controlling, that I was trying to take over their wedding. She'd been so focused on cutting me out that she never stopped to consider what would happen if I actually left. In her mind, I was just the jealous sister who needed to be put in her place. She never imagined I held all the cards, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The final call I made was to the transportation company. The luxury bus that was supposed to take the wedding party to their after-party venue received a cancellation notice on the spot. The guests began to realize that without transportation, catering, or music, the reception was effectively over. Some started making phone calls of their own, presumably arranging alternative transportation. Others simply left. Sarah's parents approached me, their faces red with anger and embarrassment. This is completely inappropriate, her father sputtered. You're ruining your own brother's wedding day. I'm not ruining anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply taking back what's mine. If Sarah's family is so convinced that I'm not welcome here, then surely they don't want anything I've provided either. I'm sure you can arrange alternative accommodations for the evening. The truth was, Sarah's family had money, but not the kind of immediate cash flow needed to book emergency catering, music, and transportation for 200 people on a Saturday evening in Beverly Hills. Most reputable vendors were already booked, and the ones that weren't would charge premium rates for same-day service. They were looking at tens of thousands of dollars in unexpected expenses, assuming they could find anyone willing to work on such short notice. As I made my way toward the exit, the envelope still in my hand, I could hear Sarah's voice rising to a near shriek behind me. You're insane. You're absolutely insane. David, do something. But David couldn't do anything. That was the beautiful part. He had no legal standing to reverse any of my cancellations. He hadn't signed any contracts, hadn't put down any deposits. He was completely powerless to stop what I'd set in motion. The final touch came as I reached the door of the country club. I turned back to address the room one last time, my voice carrying clearly over the chaos Sarah was creating. For anyone wondering about gifts, I announced, the registry was also in my name. I've just canceled it and redirected all future deliveries to my address. Sarah, since you're so concerned about family, I'm sure your family can provide everything you need for your new home. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Sarah let out a wail that could probably be heard 3 blocks away, and I knew my work here was done. As I walked out of that country club, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Complete and utter satisfaction. Sarah had wanted to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to prove that she was the most important person in David's life. Instead, she'd just learned a very expensive lesson about the difference between old money and smart money. But this was just the beginning. Sarah had declared war, and she had no idea who she was fighting. The drive home from the country club should have been the longest 20 minutes of my life, but instead I felt like I was floating. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I'd walked out. Texts from David, missed calls from my parents, even a few messages from wedding guests who'd witnessed the spectacular meltdown. I ignored them all. There would be time to deal with the fallout later, but right now I was savoring the image of Sarah's mascara-streaked face as she realized her perfect day was crumbling around her. My apartment in West Hollywood was a sanctuary of calm after the chaos I'd left behind. I poured myself a glass of wine, kicked off my heels, and settled onto my couch with my laptop. The real work was just beginning. Canceling the wedding services had been the opening move, but Sarah had given me something far more valuable than the satisfaction of ruining her reception. She'd given me justification for everything that was about to come next. The first thing I did was document everything. Screenshots of the vendor cancellation confirmations, recordings of the phone calls I'd made. California is a one-party consent state after all. And most importantly, a detailed account of exactly what Sarah had said and done in front of 200 witnesses. My years as a wedding planner had taught me that documentation was everything, and I was meticulous about keeping records. Then I opened my laptop and began crafting what would become Sarah's nightmare, a comprehensive social media campaign that would destroy her reputation in Los Angeles high society. But I wasn't going to be crude about it. Sarah prided herself on being sophisticated, refined, better than everyone else. I was going to use that against her. The first post went up on my professional Instagram account, which had nearly 50,000 followers, mostly brides-to-be, vendors, and society photographers who regularly featured my work. The image was a simple, elegant shot of an empty ballroom with scattered rose petals on the floor. The caption read, "Sometimes the most beautiful weddings are the ones that teach us the true meaning of family. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Grateful for the clarity that came from today's events. Share family, truth, your lessons learned." Within an hour, the post had dozens of comments from people who'd clearly heard about what happened. The Los Angeles society scene was smaller than most people realized, and news traveled fast. Several prominent photographers and wedding vendors commented with supportive messages, and more importantly, many of them started sharing the post to their own accounts. But that was just the appetizer. The main course required a little more preparation. I spent the next 3 hours researching Sarah's social media presence, her family's business connections, and every public event she'd attended in the past year. Sarah was one of those women who documented everything online: every charity luncheon, every shopping trip, every exclusive restaurant reservation. She lived her entire life for public consumption, constantly broadcasting her wealth and status to anyone who would pay attention. That compulsive need for validation was about to become her downfall. The first strategic strike came at midnight. I created a burner email account and sent a carefully worded message to the society reporter for Los Angeles Magazine, a woman named Victoria Chen who covered high-end weddings and social events. Victoria and I had worked together on several features over the years, and she knew me as a reliable source for insider information. The email was simple. "Victoria, you might want to look into what happened at the Martinez-Williams wedding at the Beverly Hills Country Club today. I heard there was quite a scene when the bride publicly humiliated the groom's sister, who had apparently paid for most of the wedding. The sister left and took everything with her: catering, flowers, music, the works. Might be an interesting story about family dynamics in LA society. Just thought you'd want to know." "A friend," Victoria responded within 20 minutes, asking for more details. I provided them, along with the names of several wedding guests who could corroborate the story. By morning, Victoria would have enough material for a feature article that would make Sarah infamous throughout Los Angeles society. The second strike was more subtle, but potentially more devastating. Sarah worked as a consultant for her father's jewelry stores, a made-up position that allowed her to maintain the pretense of having a career while actually doing very little. But she took that title seriously, often name-dropping her business connections at social events and positioning herself as a serious professional. I happened to know, through my network of vendor contacts, that Sarah's father's company was currently negotiating a major contract with one of LA's most prestigious hotels to provide jewelry for their high-end wedding packages. It was the kind of deal that could significantly expand their business, but it required maintaining an impeccable reputation for professionalism and class. The hotel's wedding coordinator was someone I'd worked with extensively over the years, Jennifer Walsh. No relation to Sarah's husband despite the shared surname, was known for her discretion and high standards. She didn't tolerate drama or unprofessional behavior from any of her vendor partners, which made her the perfect person to casually mention Sarah's behavior to. I crafted a careful text message. "Hey Jennifer, hope you're having a good weekend. Just wanted to give you a heads up that you might hear some chatter about today's Martinez-Williams wedding at Beverly Hills, CC. The bride had a bit of a meltdown when she publicly kicked out the groom's sister, who had paid for most of the wedding. It got pretty ugly, especially for a family that's trying to position themselves as vendors for high-end weddings. Thought you'd want to be aware in case it comes up in your circles. Let's grab coffee this week." Jennifer's response was immediate. "OMG, what? Yes, definitely want to hear more. Coffee Tuesday." By Tuesday, the story of Sarah's behavior would be circulating among every major wedding venue coordinator in Los Angeles. In an industry built on relationships and reputation, that kind of gossip could be more damaging than any negative review. But I wasn't done. The third strike was the most personal, and it required me to use information I'd gathered during the months I'd spent planning their wedding. Sarah had confided in me about various family secrets and personal embarrassments, thinking she was building a relationship with her future sister-in-law. She told me about her father's previous bankruptcy, her mother's struggle with prescription drug addiction, her own eating disorder, and most devastatingly, her previous engagement to a man who'd left her for her younger cousin. I wasn't cruel enough to expose the truly personal information. That would have been crossing a line even I wouldn't cross. But the business information about her father's financial struggles was fair game, especially since Sarah had spent months bragging about her family's wealth and success, while secretly relying on my money to pay for her wedding. The fourth strike was already in motion. Earlier in the week, I'd received a call from David asking me to reach out to some of my high-profile clients to invite them to the wedding. Several A-list celebrities and prominent business leaders had agreed to attend as my guests, lending additional prestige to what Sarah thought was going to be her triumphant social debut as Mrs. David Martinez. Those same celebrities and business leaders had witnessed Sarah's behavior firsthand. More importantly, they'd seen how she'd treated someone who had clearly gone above and beyond to support her wedding. In a town where image was everything, Sarah had just demonstrated the kind of character that would make people think twice about associating with her socially or professionally. I spent Sunday morning fielding calls from some of those guests, all expressing shock and disappointment at what they'd witnessed. Many of them asked how they could support me, and I graciously declined their offers while making sure they understood exactly what had transpired. By Monday morning, the story would be circulating through the highest levels of LA society, told and retold by people whose opinions carried real weight. The final piece of my immediate strategy was the most satisfying. Sarah had been planning to post wedding photos on social media for weeks, creating elaborate Pinterest boards and Instagram themes around her perfect day. She'd hired not one, but two photographers specifically to capture content for her social media accounts. planning to milk her wedding day for months of content. But since I'd canceled the photography contracts, there would be no professional photos of the reception, no elegant shots of the cake cutting, no romantic images of the first dance, no perfectly curated content to feed her social media addiction. Instead, the only photos circulating from her wedding would be candid shots taken by guests on their phones, many of which captured her tearful breakdown as her perfect day fell apart around her. I knew Sarah well enough to know that this would torture her more than almost anything else. She lived for social media validation, and the thought of not having picture-perfect wedding content to post for the next 6 months would eat at her constantly. Monday morning brought the first wave of consequences. Victoria Chen's article went live on the Los Angeles Magazine website at 8 a.m. titled, "When Wedding Drama Goes Too Far, a cautionary tale about family and money in Beverly Hills." The piece was diplomatically written but devastating in its implications, painting Sarah as an ungrateful bride who had bitten the hand that fed her. By 9 a.m., my phone was ringing nonstop. David called 6 times before I finally answered. "Megan, what the hell did you do?" His voice was strained, exhausted. "There's an article about us online and Sarah's father is threatening to sue you for defamation." I told the truth, I replied calmly. "Everything in that article can be verified by witnesses who were at your wedding. If Sarah's father wants to sue me, he's welcome to try, but discovery would be very interesting for his business." "This has gone too far," David said. "You've made your point. Can't we just move past this?" "Move past what, David? The fact that your wife publicly humiliated me in front of 200 people? The fact that you stood there and said nothing while she told me I wasn't family? Or the fact that she did all of this after I'd spent $150,000 on your wedding?" The silence on the other end of the line told me that David was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what Sarah had done. But his next words proved he still didn't get it. "Sarah feels terrible about what happened. She was just stressed about the wedding. She wants to apologize. She feels terrible because there are consequences," I said. "She feels terrible because her perfect day turned into a public embarrassment. She doesn't feel terrible about what she did to me." I hung up before David could respond. 10 minutes later, my mother called. "Megan, honey, I know you're hurt, but this needs to stop. Sarah's parents called us this morning. They're talking about pressing charges." "For what? Exercising my legal right to cancel contracts that were in my name? Using my own money to pay for services I was no longer interested in receiving? Tell me exactly what crime I committed, Mom." My mother sighed. "You know this isn't about legalities. This is about family." "You're right," I said. "It is about family. It's about the fact that you and Dad stood there and watched Sarah humiliate me, and you said nothing. It's about the fact that David chose his bride's cruelty over his sister's dignity. So let me ask you something. When Sarah told me I wasn't family, where were you? When she was savoring every second of my humiliation? Why didn't you speak up?" Another silence. Finally, my mother whispered, "We didn't know what to do." "Well, I did," I replied. "I knew exactly what to do. I removed myself from a situation where I wasn't wanted, and I took my contributions with me. If that makes me the villain in the story, I can live with that." The second wave of consequences hit Tuesday afternoon. Jennifer Walsh called to let me know that her hotel had decided not to move forward with Sarah's father's jewelry company as a vendor partner. "The decision had nothing to do with what you told me," she said carefully. "But when we started asking around about their reputation and reliability, some concerning information came to light." I thanked Jennifer and hung up, knowing that Sarah's father had just lost a contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential revenue. The jewelry business in Los Angeles was built on reputation and relationships, and Sarah's public behavior had created doubt about the family's professionalism and judgment. Wednesday brought news that Sarah had been quietly asked to step down from her position on the board of a prominent charity organization. Apparently, several major donors had expressed concerns about being associated with someone who had been featured so negatively in Los Angeles Magazine. The charity, which depended on maintaining relationships with LA's elite, couldn't afford to have board members who were seen as socially toxic. By Thursday, Sarah's social media accounts had gone completely dark. The woman who had posted multiple times daily for years had suddenly gone silent, unable to maintain her perfectly curated online presence in the face of mounting social and professional consequences. Friday afternoon brought the most satisfying development yet. David called, his voice barely above a whisper. "Megan, I need to tell you something. Sarah and I, we're having problems. Big problems. Her family is blaming me for what happened, saying I should have controlled you better. My friends won't stop talking about the article. Sarah's been crying for days, and she keeps saying her life is ruined." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. I was angry at David, but I didn't want to see him genuinely miserable. "She wants to meet with you," David continued. "She wants to apologize and see if there's some way to fix this." "Fix what exactly?" I asked. "The professional relationships she destroyed? The reputation she ruined? The trust she betrayed? Some things can't be fixed, David. Please," David said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. "Just meet with her. Give her a chance to make this right." I considered his request for a long moment. Part of me was curious to see what Sarah thought she could possibly say to undo the damage she'd caused. Another part of me wanted to see her grovel, to watch her realize that actions have consequences, and that some mistakes can't be undone with a simple apology. "Fine," I said finally, "I'll meet with her. But this happens on my terms, at a place of my choosing. And David, you need to understand something. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about closure." The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon at a quiet cafe in Santa Monica, neutral territory where Sarah couldn't orchestrate any dramatic scenes. As I drove there, I reflected on the week that had passed since the wedding. 7 days ago, I had been the generous sister, bending over backward to give David and Sarah the wedding of their dreams. Today, I was the woman who had systematically dismantled Sarah's social and professional standing with surgical precision. I felt no guilt about what I'd done. Sarah had made her choice when she decided to humiliate me publicly. She'd gambled that I would quietly accept her cruelty, that I would prioritize family peace over my own dignity. She'd been wrong, and now she was learning that some gambles come with consequences far beyond what you're prepared to pay. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few couples enjoying late Sunday brunch. Sarah was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking nothing like the radiant bride she'd been a week earlier. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore no makeup, and her expensive clothes couldn't hide the fact that she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She stood up when she saw me, her hands trembling slightly. "Megan, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I replied, taking the seat across from her. "But David asked, and despite everything that's happened, I still care about my brother." Sarah's eyes filled with tears immediately. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so incredibly sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. I was wrong, completely wrong, and I've been sick about it all week." I studied her face, looking for any sign that this was another manipulation, another calculated performance. But all I saw was genuine misery, and what appeared to be real remorse. "You're sorry because there were consequences," I said quietly. "You're sorry because your perfect life fell apart. But are you sorry about what you actually did to me?" "Yes," Sarah said emphatically. "God, yes. I was jealous of how close you and David are, and I was insecure about not having contributed more to the wedding myself. I took all of that out on you in the worst possible way, and I hate myself for it." It was more self-awareness than I'd expected from her, but it was also too little, too late. "Sarah, you didn't just hurt my feelings," I said. "You humiliated me in front of 200 people. You told me I wasn't family after I'd spent months planning your wedding and thousands of dollars making it perfect for you. You savored every second of my embarrassment. That's not something that can be fixed with an apology." "I know," she whispered. "I know I can't undo it, but maybe there's some way I can make amends, some way to show you how sorry I am." I leaned back in my chair, considering her question. "What exactly are you asking me, Sarah? The article, the social media posts, the professional connections you've damaged. Could you maybe put out a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding, that we've resolved our differences?" And there it was. Sarah wasn't really interested in making amends or earning forgiveness. She wanted me to help her undo the consequences of her own actions. She wanted to use my reputation and connections to repair the damage she'd caused herself. "No," I said simply. "Please," Sarah begged. "My father's business is suffering. I've been asked to leave charity boards. People won't return my calls. My entire life is falling apart." "And whose fault is that?" I asked. "Did I force you to tell me I wasn't family? Did I make you humiliate me at your wedding? Did I create this situation? Or did you?" Sarah's face crumpled, and she began crying in earnest. "I know it's my fault. I know I brought this on myself. But Megan, please. I'm begging you. I'll do anything to fix this." I felt a moment of something that might have been pity. Watching this woman who had seemed so powerful and confident just a week ago, reduced to begging in a Santa Monica cafe. But then I remembered the look on her face as she'd told me I wasn't welcome at the wedding, the pleasure she'd taken in my humiliation, the way she'd stood there watching me bleed metaphorically and enjoyed every second of it. "You want to know what you can do to fix this?" I asked. "Nothing. There is nothing you can do, Sarah, because the problem isn't the consequences you're facing now. The problem is who you are as a person. The problem is that when you had a choice between kindness and cruelty, you chose cruelty. The problem is that you're not sorry about what you did. You're sorry about what happened to you because of what you did." I stood up from the table, leaving Sarah crying into her untouched coffee. "Tell David I hope he finds happiness," I said. "But it won't be with someone who's capable of what you did. People like you don't change, Sarah. You just get better at hiding who you really are." As I walked out of the cafe, I could hear Sarah's sobs behind me. I felt no satisfaction in her tears, no joy in her misery. But I felt something else, a deep, unshakable certainty that I had done exactly what needed to be done. Some people spend their entire lives trying to teach others to treat them with respect. But sometimes the most powerful lesson you can teach is that disrespecting you comes with a price they can't afford to pay. Sarah had wanted to prove she was more important than me, more valuable, more deserving of David's loyalty. Instead, she'd proven that she was exactly the kind of person who would burn down everything good in her life for a moment of petty satisfaction. And now, she was living in the ashes of her own making. 2 months after the wedding that never was, I received an interesting piece of news through my professional network. Sarah's father's jewelry company had filed for bankruptcy protection, unable to recover from the loss of several major contracts and the damage to their reputation in the luxury market. Sarah and David had separated, with David moving back in with our parents while Sarah returned to live with her own family in their significantly downsized circumstances. Meanwhile, my business had never been better. The story of the wedding planner who stood up for herself had spread through LA's event planning community, earning me respect and admiration from both colleagues and clients. Several high-profile brides had specifically requested to work with me after hearing about how I'd handled Sarah's betrayal, wanting someone who wouldn't be pushed around or taken advantage of. I'd also received inquiries from 3 major publications, wanting to interview me about family dynamics and financial boundaries in wedding planning. The story had struck a nerve with many people who had found themselves in similar situations, being taken advantage of by family members who felt entitled to their generosity. On a warm December afternoon, I was in my office reviewing contracts for an upcoming celebrity wedding when my assistant knocked on my door. "Megan, your brother David is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." I hadn't spoken to David since the day after my meeting with Sarah. I'd heard through my parents that he and Sarah had separated, that he was struggling with depression, that he'd been forced to take a leave of absence from his job due to the stress of everything that had happened. Part of me had wanted to reach out, but a larger part of me had held back, waiting to see if he would take responsibility for his role in what had transpired. "Send him in," I said. David looked terrible when he walked into my office. He'd lost weight, his clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. He sat down in the chair across from my desk without saying anything for several long moments. "I'm getting divorced," he said finally. "I heard," I replied carefully. "I'm sorry it didn't work out." "Are you?" David asked, looking at me directly for the first time since he'd entered my office. "Are you really sorry, or are you satisfied that you were right about her all along?" It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Both," I said. "I'm sorry because I know you loved her, and I never wanted to see you hurt, but I'm also relieved that you finally see who she really is." David nodded slowly. "I've had a lot of time to think over the past 2 months, about what happened at the wedding, about the choices I made, about the kind of man I want to be." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I came here to apologize." "For what specifically?" I asked. "For standing there and watching her humiliate you. For not speaking up when I should have. For choosing her approval over your dignity. For being the kind of brother who would let someone treat his sister like that." His voice broke slightly on the last words. It was the apology I'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement of his role in what had happened, but hearing it didn't bring the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I just felt tired and sad about everything our family had lost. "I accept your apology," I said quietly. "But David, I need you to understand something. It's not just about what happened at the wedding. It's about the months leading up to it, when you let Sarah gradually push me out of your life. It's about the fact that you never once questioned her narrative that I was controlling or jealous. You knew me your entire life, and you still chose to believe her version of who I was, instead of trusting your own experience with me." "I know," David said. "I was so desperate to make her happy, to prove that I could be the husband she wanted, that I lost sight of everything else, including the person who had always been there for me." We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the weight of everything that had been broken and what, if anything, could be repaired. "What happens now?" David asked finally. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm not ready to go back to the way things were. Too much has been said and done, but I'm also not interested in punishing you forever. Maybe we can find something new. Something different." David stood up to leave, then turned back at the door. "For what it's worth, Megan, what you did at the wedding, it was brilliant. Brutal, but brilliant. Sarah never saw it coming because she underestimated you completely. She thought you were just the generous sister who would take whatever she dished out. She had no idea who she was really dealing with." After he left, I sat in my office thinking about his words. Sarah had underestimated me, that was true. But more than that, she'd made the fundamental error of believing that kindness was weakness, that generosity was naivety, that someone who chose to help family was someone who could be taken advantage of without consequence. She'd confused my willingness to support my brother's happiness with an inability to protect myself when attacked. She'd mistaken my desire for family harmony for a lack of backbone. Most importantly, she'd assumed that because I'd given freely, I would continue to give even when mistreated. In the end, Sarah had learned that there's a world of difference between someone who chooses to be generous and someone who can be exploited.